Yeah, hey everybody, glad that people are here. At some point in this session, I'll probably ask for people to speak. We can do like the hand raising thing, or you could probably just start talking because I'm sure people will be afraid to share, but there'll be a couple instances where people can weigh in. And at the end, I want to have like a really informal Q&A where we can just talk about whatever you all are interested in. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, so you may not see my face very much here. Sorry about that. And then we'll kind of get started. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up, maybe?
Looks good to us.
Cool. Okay, so this is a pretty informal talk. I really do want to kind of cover my experience with technical blogging, just writing articles online, specifically on dev, but I've written articles in other places too, and can talk a little bit about that. And then how that relates to being a developer and how that's had an impact on my career. And like I said, this will have some back and forth, but I really want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions near the end. Before we get started, Will introduce me, but I work on a project called Forem, which powers dev, dev.to. It's essentially a social media site for developers. We kind of come together, support each other, share content and knowledge. It's a really great place to do technical blogging. It's where I've had the most success doing technical blogging. So it's where I tend to point people. And it's sort of important to note that I was a dev user long before I worked for dev. And I wrote articles on that platform, including one on how writing articles and networking through content creation got me my current job and other jobs before that. So we'll talk a little bit more about dev later, about its kind of merits as a publishing platform for technical blogging. We're going to touch on really briefly like blogging and developers, the relationship there, why it's a good idea. I'm going to share my writing process, which by no means is universal, but should give you an idea of at least how I write articles and maybe inspire you to think of your own writing process, or you can copy mine. I don't care, that's fine. And I'm going to quickly jump through some blogging tips at the end. And then I want to do something that's sort of an experiment. I want to have a group ideation exercise, which basically just means I want to help each person walk away from this talk with, 3, 5, 10, however many article ideas, so that when you kind of finish here, you can go start drafting up something. And then we'll do Q&A for however long people want to do Q&A. So let's talk about blogging. This is a point where I really kind of want some feedback here. I may have to pull Zoom up so I can see if anybody wants to raise their hand or just start talking. Maybe Will can be the arbiter there. But does anyone here have an opinion on why a developer should blog? Anyone who's done it or seen other developers who are blogging, why do you think that benefits the developer?
They can learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on what your purpose is, but like particularly in open source communities, like often the developers will write blog posts, like in Rust, for example, like every year. Like I think every year they get people to like write a blog post about how they pull the core developers, or just anyone who develops them to write like what they think the language should look like going forwards. And then like people will write blog posts about like approaches that they think work or things that they think are neat to sort of achieve some sort of consensus.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Cool. I agree with both those answers. I think those are really great insights. Personally, in my career, the number one thing I end up talking about when I explain why I write technical articles is career growth. And that may sound like a little self-centered, but that is really the reason that I got into it, and that sort of motivates me to continue creating content, beyond maybe the more altruistic reasons. But I can personally say and guarantee that if you're writing technical content, if you're creating content that is about your profession, you're going to see some benefits in your career, especially your ability to network with other developers online. I've met a lot of people that are like personal heroes for me through my content creation, and it's been really neat to actually become friends and acquaintances with some of those people who I used to like sort of idolize a little bit. Another really important thing that developers get out of blogging is knowledge sharing. None of us would be where we're at professionally if we didn't share knowledge. And that's what open source is. That's what developers on Twitter, that's what developers who write books, that's what they're doing. They're sharing their knowledge. They're helping us all be better. And I think knowledge sharing also has a cool facet within your like work, your team at work. I actually send my articles frequently to coworkers at my current job and my last job. When a junior would ask me a question, a lot of times if I receive that question multiple times, I would actually go write an article on that question, and then I could send that article to the juniors on my team. And that's a really useful way to disseminate knowledge. And I think another really important reason to blog as a developer is personal growth outside of your career. You'll receive a lot of feedback if you put things online, and that tends to be a real growth opportunity to learn how to receive that feedback, which can be valuable in your personal life outside of your career. And you'll also learn a lot about learning, I think, at least in my experience. Blogging is a really, really good way to retain knowledge. If you write about what you're learning, you will probably learn a lot, retain a lot of information. And every blogger and technical content creator makes jokes about finding their own content on Google when they're searching for answers to questions. And that actually does happen quite a bit. And it's sort of nice to remind yourself that you did know this thing, and that revisiting your content's a really great way to remember it. So I know we sent out a survey and talked about it. I was going to ask how many of you blog, but I have that information now. So I'm interested because I think that a lot of developers want to blog, and a lot of developers are interested in blogging, but I think a small number of developers actually start blogging. And I think in my experience, very few developers write more than 10 articles a year. I think there's like a very small percentage, like 5% of the developers who are blogging are writing more than 10 articles a year. And that may sound intimidating, but honestly, I think if you can write 5 articles in 2020, I think you're going to see a lot of the benefits I've seen in my career. Just from writing those 5 articles, you'll be able to tap into this really supportive and very large community of developers online. And I think that you'll see a lot of career growth and opportunities and doors open to you, just like they have for me, if you're able to invest just a couple hours a month in writing. So I think the next step here, I lost focus on my window. All right, the next step here, let's talk about my writing process. Writing processes are not universal. There's giant books on how you should write, what people think the right way to write is. I'm not going to stand up here and say that I know the right way to write, but this is what I do, and hopefully that will help you. I've been able to break my process down into these 4 steps. So I have ideation, drafting, editing, and publishing, and I'm gonna jump into each of those and explain them. Ideation is a word that you may have heard in relation to like product development, or maybe features on software that you've worked on. But I think generally the word just means developing and refining ideas. So I don't think this needs to happen all at once or all up front for blogging, but it is really important to me that I go into every article with a picture of my ideal reader in my head and a sort of writing prompt to focus my ideas. So the way I come up with those 2 things, I always start with audience. I think that's key and super duper important. So in my case, when I think of an audience, I frequently think of a real life person that I know or have met or interacted with and use them as an archetype for who I'm writing to. So occasionally that's a junior on my team who's asked me a question. It could be someone who's DM'd me on Twitter and asked me a question. And most frequently it's me. So I think of myself and say, okay, if I found this article in a couple months, how would I want this information given to me? How would I best receive it? And I think this is key to start with because your audience informs every question that you're going to have while you write going forward. So I would definitely start with trying to refine this audience facet. And again, for me, I think the best way to do this is to think of a real life person that can inform how you write. And if you get stuck here, that's not a big problem at all. I would just pick yourself, write the way you would like to be written to, basically. After you've got sort of an audience in your head, it's, in my opinion, important to have an idea of where you're going to go with your article, or have an idea. For an article, you can't really write an article if you struggle to come up with these ideas. And that's something that I historically struggled with a lot, was coming up with enough ideas to write articles. I generally advise people to keep like a text file or a notepad that they write down ideas for their articles. So the way this looks for me is when inspiration strikes me, I start writing lists of titles in my notebook. And, you know, a couple examples, these are actual ones that I've written down that I haven't written yet, but just for the sake of having some examples, I have one idea that's it's just a title for an article that's write your tech resume like Hemingway, or another one is why commit messages matter, Git is more powerful than you think. And then another one is just defining terms in SQL. So those are, you know, varying levels of vague, and it's like one is very specific, two are kind of vague, but for me, those have a meaning and they work like a writing prompt. So I know that that's sort of the question in my head that I'm writing to answer. And if I have that in conjunction with an audience, then I'm able to write effectively towards a goal to a person. And I think that's like the majority of the battle when you're trying to come up with article ideas. And when I say inspiration, I want to touch on that too. It's sort of vague, right? Inspiration can mean a lot of things. For me, my experiences with like inspiration for writing articles, typically it's inspiration to me is when someone asks me a question. Because as soon as someone has asked me that question, I know there's a number of people out there having the same question. But I think that you can also find article ideas in the error messages in your code. You can find it in the mistakes you make professionally or personally. You can find them, especially in areas of tech that you're afraid of. This is a big one that I think people don't talk about a lot, but a lot of people out here who are writing articles and content on tech don't know that tech when they start out writing that content. They're using it as a way to learn. So for me, when I first started my career, I was really intimidated by Git. I wrote a bunch of articles on Git, and now it's one of the things I'm most comfortable with. And I think that that's a really great way to learn. So if you're like, find yourself really afraid of a piece of tech that's adjacent to you or that you frequently need to use, that's a great candidate for article titles that can turn into articles. Again, I think the takeaway here is you should keep some kind of record, whether it's a notebook or a text file, of these titles that can serve as writing prompts as you go. And I think once you have that list of titles, this is probably the single most important question you can ask. Does this resonate with my audience? So you have that audience, that archetype, that person you're writing to. Look at your titles and say, okay, does this answer a question or concern this person's having? Does the person read this title and know what my intent is? I think this question, does this resonate with my audience, is something you should revisit throughout your writing process, but it's especially important to do when you're formulating the idea. So the next step in my writing process is drafting, and typically that's when the article starts to take shape. I know a lot of people at this stage in writing an article would write an outline, and I think if that's you, that's a great way to go. It's a great way to get something on the page that you can think about. I'm a really verbose person. I talk a lot and I tend to sort of bird walk. So for me, I just try to get as many thoughts on the page as I can. That's the most natural thing for me to do. So I take my prompt, I take my audience, and I try to completely answer my prompt. And I try to really focus on using reliable and truthful information in this stage so I don't have to worry that maybe I've included too much opinion. Again, I think if writing an outline works for you, this is a good place to do that. But once you have sort of a working draft, you can really go through it and make sure that your voice is showing through. I think people are afraid when they write technical content that if they're too informal, it'll look unprofessional or something. Honestly, with blogging, it's a very informal format, and your draft is your opportunity to really just let your voice shine through in spades. It should feel like I'm talking to you and getting to know you when I read your blog. And I think your voice is one of the most important things in technical blogging, because no one writes quite like you. And what I mean by that is that your voice is extremely unique. It's probably as unique as your background, and people connect to different voices in unique ways. So for an example, you and I, anyone in this call, can write really great articles about the Major League Hacking Fellowship program that you're a part of right now, but we would write it in totally different voices from totally different perspectives. And people who might really not like my article might resonate really well with your article and connect with you. And I think that's true for pretty much any topic, especially technical topics. I don't think a person should skip out on blogging just because someone out there has a bigger or better blog on the same topic that you're interested in writing on. I know a lot of people say, oh, I want to write about React, but Dan Abramov or Kinsey Dodds writes about React, so why should I? I don't think that's a good excuse, because someone who might not really get Kent or Dan's voice might connect with you. Maybe you read along with Dan Ebermau's blog or Kenzie Dodd's courses and you're lost, but you probably have a peer or a colleague out there that's similar to you, it's a similar background to you, and they will benefit uniquely from hearing your voice. So that's, in my opinion, a really important reason for all of developers to be blogging and not just a select few. So the next step after you sort of got a draft is editing. This might seem kind of like the obvious next step, but I think editing for me is really, really important. Maybe less so for people who are more focused and concise on how they write. But I'm a really verbose person. Like I said, I talk a lot. So editing for me is mostly cutting out things that are unnecessary. In blogging particularly, you have to remember that you're writing on the internet, and people on the internet have really short attention spans. So I think, and beyond that, you also want to make sure people are able to find the information they need. So I think that when you're blogging, it's important to write concise and readable articles rather than showing off your vocabulary or writing like poetic stuff, because ultimately you're trying to convey an idea in the most efficient and clear way possible. So I really recommend to use editing as an opportunity to cut things down and make them better for an audience with a shorter attention span, or better for the audience that you've pictured yourself right into previously, which is why I think editing is one of the most important stages in this process, to ask yourself, does this resonate with my audience again? For me, like I said, I picture a unique person. And I say, like in my article, if I was having this conversation with a person, how would I phrase these things so they best understand them? I think this is the right thing to do during your editing process, is to look through your article, especially analyzing your voice, and ask yourself if you're meeting your audience where they're at. This is a really good opportunity to kind of pivot and make sure you're doing that. So publishing, this is sort of a vague term. I'm not sure it's the right one, but I'm using that to describe how I get content to people. I'm not going to talk about like social media marketing strategies or anything like that, because I don't do that. I have had a pretty significant number of people reading my content, interacting with me online in a really organic way. So I'll talk about like the two options I think are the best here. And in this order, I think writing on Dev is the best path. Obviously, I worked there, so I might say that. But as a person who used Dev before I worked there, I really feel strongly that this is the right option. Secondarily, I think you can host your own blog. And I think the right tool to do that, if you're just getting into technical blogging, is probably GitHub Pages. That's what I've done in the past. So I'll talk briefly about that, with the caveat that I don't do this anymore. And the reason I don't do that, I think it's a lot of stress and a lot of work. And I obsessed over the things like the tech I was using and the design of the blog. And I didn't really spend enough time writing articles. So I think if you think building a blog sounds like a super fun technical project, go for it. I think Gatsby and Jekyll are great tools. I think that they can make really fun blogs and you'll learn a lot while you're doing it. But I also feel pretty strongly that you should be focused on writing articles and not fixing the CSS on your blog. You can do that kind of in your day job and you can build those technical skills, but the real benefit from blogging only comes when you're writing articles. So that's why I chose personally to write on Dev. And back when I made that choice before I worked there, I kind of wrote down the three things I think made me make that decision. So first and foremost for me is that Dev is an inclusive community that I align with. It's really, really supportive. The people there are really excited to engage with you. I think there are alternatives to Dev, really great platforms that you can write on, but I don't think any of them have the same type of community. And for me, that was really important. And secondarily, a reason that might be more compelling to someone interested in getting into technical blogging, Dev put me in front of a ton of developers. I didn't have to build a following. I have maybe 1,000 Twitter followers, which compared to a lot of people out there writing blogs is not a lot. But I've had hundreds of thousands of views on my articles on Dev, because Dev put me in front of a lot of people who wanted to read content like what I was writing without me having to go out and build that audience first. So I definitely recommend that. That helps you to avoid kind of the issue of like the chicken and egg problem of, well, should I write a blog if no one's listening? And the final reason was that I was able to write my first blog post in a couple of minutes. I didn't have that paralysis of worrying about CSS and design and the right tech stack for writing a blog. So this is what I recommend people do as a newcomer to technical writing and to writing articles. Go out there, and if you decide that you want to host your own blog in the future, Dev's a great platform for that because you can pull your content off of it. No one's going to stop you from doing that, and you can put that on your own blog or redirect that, or you can kind of cross-pollinate between your own blog and this community. And a lot of successful technical bloggers have done that. So again, that's one of my recommendations on when it comes to publishing and how I go about that process. So super quick, I'm going to hit on a couple tips for blogging online that I think everyone should hear. The first thing is writing concisely. People on the internet have a super duper short attention span. So you should be writing short sentences. You should be getting to your point quickly. You should be avoiding verbose explanations. Don't try to be poetic online. If you want to write a book, that's a great place for that. But people who find blog articles, imagine yourself in that situation. You're usually looking for a solution to a problem you're having right now. I think you should break up text with images. This kind of goes along with being concise. You don't want to write a wall of text. You want there to be some breaks in formatting, and a really good way to encourage yourself to do that is by including images. You can either make your own images, you can borrow like copyright lax images and license-free images online. There's lots of sites to find those resources to find those. But I definitely recommend finding some kind of imagery to break up your text and help communicate what you're trying to say. This also helps you reach a wider audience of people who might not want to read a wall of text, and they might get more out of the picture, especially if you're making diagrams and that sort of thing. And this is one that I like to mention, is that writing like a list article can be really helpful, especially when you're first starting out, because it helps you to really focus your idea. So I wouldn't turn my nose up at the idea of writing a listicle. I personally have done it. I think that it's a great way to get your ideas out into the world in a format that's approachable. People know what they're getting into when they jump into your article, and you as a writer don't have to stress so much about your format and how you organize your ideas. So I think it's a great place to start as a new writer. And then finally, if you're not quite so comfortable with, actually this isn't finally in this set of tips, sorry. But if you're not quite so comfortable with writing, you can try out other content formats that will get you the same types of benefits. So I like to write, but I also have a podcast, and that for me was an entirely different experience. And I think that for some people, that's a much better format. And if you find yourself struggling to write, try videos, try maybe hosting a podcast, or if you don't want to invest that much, see if you can go guest on someone's podcast. You can just something kind of like photo journaling if you're really interested in using imagery like we were talking about. But I think that it's important not to let sort of a fear of the content format stop you from engaging with the developer community. And then this is my final point here. I think that this is a super important point that people don't hear enough. Consistency is more important than pretty much anything else when you're putting technical content online. You can write the world's best blog post, but if you only write one, it's probably not going to be seen that often. You're probably not going to really feel a lot of accomplishment other than just having written that, which is a great accomplishment. And if that's what you want to go after, just having written a really, really good solid article, then you can do that, absolutely. But if you're looking to engage with a lot of people, have a lot of interaction, and really grow this set of skills, I think that remaining consistent, even when it's kind of discouraging, is the key. So at this point, like my podcast, which I'm a terrible podcast host, I don't upload episodes regularly at all. But when I first started, I was only getting a couple hundred downloads on every episode. Now I get, however many thousands on every episode, because I just posted enough episodes, and I got better at it as I went, because it's kind of the nature of producing a lot of content. The quality sort of improves over time. So just by being consistent, I was able to get a number of people to care about my podcast. The same went with blogging. I would say my first 10 or so articles on Dev didn't get a very big following or have a super powerful impact. But as I kept going, articles started to resonate more and more, and people started to engage more. And I think this kind of goes back to that initial point I was making, that I don't think many developers are going to write more than 10 articles a year, even. An acquaintance of mine told me that she decided to write an article every week for a year, and she ended up having one of the largest programming followings that I know about. So I think that's something that clearly I've seen work, is just consistently producing content and improving as you go. And that's, I think, for me, very encouraging to know that like it can only go up if you just keep working at it. And it's also, if it's something that you get enjoyment out of, then there's no reason to not be consistently producing content that helps people around you and helps you grow. So that's sort of the end of like the presentation side of this. I want to work on this next part kind of as a bit of like a workshop kind of experience. It's sort of a group exercise, and I'm kind of harkening back to that ideation idea that I brought up. So the goal here is that each of you kind of walk away with a handful of article ideas that you can actually go write. And I kind of have a promise that I'll make to you at the end of this if you try that. So I don't know if this is going to work, but anyways, I'm going to try to play audio in a second. We'll see if it works. If it doesn't, it's fine. But what I want everybody to do is either open up like a text file or get a notepad, or just use your head if you don't have those things available to you. I'm going to do this too, actually, and see what I come up with. But at the top of a new file or the top of a notepad, I want you to write down the idea. Who's a person that like you would write an article for? Like who is your ideal audience when you're writing an article? It can be like you as a developer. It could be a friend who's learning to code. It could be a potential employer. It could be developers at the same level as you, or developers who are better than you maybe at writing code, more experienced. I just kind of want people to take a minute and think about that. Maybe, like I said, write it down on a sheet of paper. And then I want to try to kind of support each of us in, I'm gonna find my Zoom window, in coming up with some article ideas that might turn into articles in like the very near future. So I'm gonna give everybody like 2 minutes to do that. I'm gonna be quiet for like 2 minutes, and I will try to play music. Will, you can tell me if this sounds terrible. Can you hear that?
Yeah, sounds fine. I could have mentioned that I have been playing lo-fi at the start of every session pretty much. So I could have just put lo-fi on for you very easily.
Cool. Well, here we are. Awesome. So I'm gonna give everybody like 2 minutes to like write down who you want to write for at the top of a piece of paper or a new file. And if you already have that answer, just like think about that person for a couple minutes and imagine how you would speak to them if you were gonna have a conversation.
Jacob, would you be able to share the slides?
Like send them to you?
Yes, someone of the fellows asked if you'd be able to share them afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I will.
Cool. Yeah, you can do it afterwards.
So yeah, if it helps you in this situation, imagine having a conversation with this person and how you speak to them. So I'll share who I wrote down. I wrote down one of my coworkers that's more of a junior engineer named Andy. Actually, he's not a junior anymore. He's been programming for like 4 years. He's super duper good. But he was a junior when I started, and he actually helped onboard me, even though to a degree, like in terms of experience, I'm a little bit ahead of him. But that for me was a really interesting experience because I had a person that maybe technically didn't have quite the same amount of knowledge I did, but knew a lot more about dev than I did. And so our relationship is a little bit unique in that way. So if I was writing to Andy, the way I would speak to Andy is different than the way I might speak to someone I don't know, or someone who has a lot more experience than me, or someone who has a lot less experience than me. Andy is to a degree like a peer. So the way I write to Andy would be pretty unique. Let's go into the next slide here. So you can put that written down. And I want to talk about kind of coming up with...
Could you just turn the music down a little bit? It went up like really loudly for a second.
Quite a bit louder. Okay. Cool. I want to talk about article title ideas and think of these as writing prompts for yourself. So on that same notepad or text file, I want to try to think of three 5 or 10, whatever you feel like you have in you, ideas that are things that you would want to share with this person, or things that you think you could explain to this person. And there are a lot of places to go for inspiration here. One really, really great space is your search history. Like, if you're a developer, you're constantly going to be searching error messages. You're constantly going to be looking things up. Like, something that I looked up is, how do I get RSpec and Rails to expect, a forbidden response from a browser when they try to navigate to a link. Things like that. Like, that's not something that I don't even know what the answer to that is right now, but I know I've Googled it. So I might write an article about writing tests in that kind of scenario. Another good place is the last question you asked, maybe your mentor in this fellowship program, or maybe a peer, or maybe the last question that was asked to you. That's one that I tend to use a lot, because people reach out on Twitter or Discord or whatever and say, I had this technical problem, how would you handle this? Another one is, what was the last debate I had? This is a way to get like an article that you feel very strongly about. I had an argument with someone about our hiring process at the company, and I wrote a really strongly worded article about things that I would drop out of interview processes if companies did, which is probably my most opinionated article, but it can be a really interesting way to find things you care a lot about. And like I mentioned earlier, a really great one is what tech am I afraid of? Especially ones that you probably need to know, but you're afraid of. So for me, that was Git, but it could be React, or it could be something more complicated or intimidating. Like, maybe you want to learn to write low-level code, but you've only ever written something like Ruby, and that might be intimidating for you, but you could learn a lot by writing an article about it. So for the next 3 or 4 minutes, see if you can kind of spitball a couple ideas, and then we'll share a few, and I'll share the ones I come up with too. And I just want to hear what people come up with, and if anyone's feeling brave, they can tell me maybe 2 or 3 of the article title ideas that they write down. So again, these should be working titles. They don't need to be perfect. They give you a bit of a prompt to write from. So maybe that's 10 ways to fix mistakes in Git. That's something that I've written before, something like that. Or maybe it's an article on how to test React, or how to test some specific case in React. Just something that you've been thinking about or you've Googled recently. So yeah, for the next couple minutes, see if you can write down a few of those. And then I'll ask people to share if they're feeling brave. But I have a notebook, I'm also doing this. Cool. So let's do a little bit of show and tell here. Is anybody feeling brave and want to share one of the article ideas that they came up with? Just reading the title, and again, it can be a work in progress title. One of mine has a slash in it, which I probably wouldn't do in a real article. You're welcome to just kind of go for it, I think.
Formal verification of a hobby blog.
Okay.
Should I explain a bit more, or just?
Whatever makes sense to you, I think.
I have an interest in formal verification, which is interesting. It's a model of software development where you can do weird maths and model your program, and then you can basically come up with a mathematical proof that the program works. And generally this is used in really complicated hardware projects, like robotic arms or something, where the risk of failure is so high that you can't have it. But there are tools that people have written, particularly ETH, which is a university in Switzerland, have built some really nice tools that make it much easier to do it. And I thought a hobby blog, little sort of Django or Python Flask sort of blogging application would be it's because it's such a small project, theoretically, you can make it a small thing. You could of course have the most elaborate hobby blog. It's sort of a cool way of doing quite a bit of complicated stuff.
Yeah, I know nothing about that, so I would definitely be interested in reading an article on that. That sounds super cool. Even just an intro crash course for people like me who know absolutely nothing about that kind of tech. Anybody else have an idea for an article that they wrote down.
So I was semi-participating while doing other stuff, but I basically answered your questions, and I really liked how it kind of made me go, oh yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things that you mentioned was like, what was the last debate you had? And it was about 30 minutes ago. Me and my housemate who was in the room next to me were having a debate about how the keyboard on MacBooks are rubbish. Well, I thought they're nice, but he had an argument about they're bad. And then we had a discussion about like people having preferences on different types of keys, and some people like different types of switches and stuff. And I thought it'd be pretty interesting to like kind of do something about different types of keyboards and why people like different types of keyboards.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's actually really relevant to developers based on dev Twitter. Like, yeah, people talk about like mechanical keyboards and stuff all day. So, and I know that the Apple keyboards are like a point of contention for sure.
Yeah.
You could do a really like fun survey or something.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. We have very different opinions on keyboards in this house. Hopefully that's like a nice icebreaker for people who've got a few ideas. Has anyone else got any ideas?
I wrote one in chat, automation with GitHub Actions. So this was based on my last search. I don't know if this is really considered GitHub Actions, but you know how if you like make a PR and you write like closes an issue, like if you merge the PR, it's going to close the issue, right? So I guess I just thought about how you could just automate stuff with GitHub, and how about I didn't really explore that much. So I think it'd be nice to explore.
Yeah, that's something that I've worked on that I think is really, really interesting. I stopped sharing so I could read the chat, but because I couldn't find it in the GitHub or the Zoom UI. But yeah, so GitHub Actions is something that I've worked with and broken a couple times. So I'd be super interested in like someone who actually went in and investigated like how it worked, and especially like I think the GitHub documentation is really good, but I also think that like I struggle to read the way they've written it. So someone who could like put it in narrative format of themselves learning about it would be really cool. So making it more approachable. Yeah, a couple of ones I wrote down, like again with the idea that I'm writing to one of my coworkers. This one's super simple, but like a Stimulus JS crash course. Stimulus is kind of like a jQuery replacement, and we have some like jQuery type JavaScript in dev that I would like to get rid of. So just writing a really quick, 300-word article on how to kind of transition from jQuery to Stimulus. Another one I wrote down was a Ruby developer's intro to C, because like Ruby is a very high level language and C is a little bit lower level language. So, and Ruby is written in C, so a lot of Ruby developers would love to have some C knowledge, but it's sort of intimidating. And that's something that I've been exploring the last few months. So it'd be really fun to write like I'm a Ruby developer and here's my approach to learning C. And again, I have a picture of who I was writing for in those cases, and that helps me like decide at what level to write. Does anybody else have an article idea they want to share before we move on? Cool. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Awesome. So this next slide here, I basically have homework for you if you were foolish enough to join this call. Step one, the number one most important homework assignment. Dev has set up like a special campaign for Major League Hacking Fellows to write an article on Dev. So if you have a Dev account, you can just go to this URL. If you don't, you can go sign up with Twitter or GitHub. It takes like 3 seconds. And you can then go to this URL, dev.to/new/MLHgrad. And there's a template there for you. And you can write an article based on this template, just discussing your experiences as an MLH fellow. And if you do that by August 26th, we will give you a special badge on your profile so you can have internet flair, and that will make you feel really special. Well, I actually really like the badge system on Dev. But anyways, so that's one thing that I would love for everyone to do. And I think that's a really good way if you're leaving this program and looking for a job or looking to kind of grow your network. One of the best things you're going to be able to do is put your name out on a website that a ton of developers visit every day. And you'll also be able to describe sort of why this program made you more employable, why it's so unique. And and that's sort of like you can shoot that link to maybe a prospective employer or put it in a cover letter to describe what you did over the summer. So that's something that we want to encourage all of you to do. For those of you who are a little more interested in writing specifically technical blog content and maybe writing another article in conjunction or subsequently after the MLH specific article, I really want you to take maybe the article idea you came up with here or one that you've had for a while and write a draft of it and then send it to me on Dev or on Twitter or in Discord. I'm in the Major League Hacking Discord, and I'll proofread it for you and give you feedback. I'm super happy to do that and help you get it posted on Dev. I think that if everyone did this, it would be awesome, and I would still honor that promise. If 50 of you do this on the same day, it may take me a minute, but if 10 or 15 people do this, if 20 people do this, I will go through every single one of those and give you my feedback and help you get it posted and help you make sure that it's very clear and concise and you're communicating well. So again, it's sort of my promise that if you want to start blogging, I will help you do that. I think that that's something that every developer should at least try, and I'm more than happy to help you get an article out the door. And I can also do that if you want me to look over your MLH grad article as well. So yeah, write these things down, take a note, whatever. I'll send the slides out, but these are two things that I would love to see people in this call do. The first one, again, is special for Major League Hacking, and I think it's a great opportunity to kind of talk about the experience you had and sort of sell yourself. I think we have like 10 more minutes or so. I'm not sure exactly. I think it was an hour-long time slot, but I just want to open this up to any kind of Q&A. I'm an open book, so I will answer any questions anyone has. And then if there's something you wanted to ask that you don't want to ask in front of a group, you can connect with me on Dev or on Twitter or whatever and DM me on those platforms. My Twitter handle's in the bottom right of this slide, and my Dev account is in the bottom left. But yeah, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask about technical blogging or anything pertaining to writing content on Dev or in general, I'm happy to answer. If not, I have a few that came through in the survey that I can kind of answer free form.
Yeah, I'm happy to read those out to you. But if you've got any questions, feel free to either unmute your microphone, or you can, so I've got to zoom over to the right-hand side, or you can type it in the chat, up to you. While we wait for some people to put some questions in, I'm going to ask some of the questions we had submitted beforehand. So some of them you probably already covered, but we'll go for a big one at first from Tamor, who's actually here. In a blog which caters to users sitting at an intersection between topics, let's say, for example, looking at ethics in technology, how can one cater for users with different experiences and skill sets? For example, I have readers who are very technical and readers who are not technical at all. Is it possible for me to cater to both sets, or is it just a hopeless pursuit, and should I cater more specifically towards one group? Or is the answer to experiment and find out? A bit long-winded, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I mean, there's a couple answers, right? So I might even write 2 articles there. Maybe you have different opinions, but I like the idea of maybe a little more quantity. Like, I like to write more articles when I can, and I think it's a good option to write like 2 shorter articles rather than writing one really long one. I think another option is to you can write for a technical audience and a less technical audience, as long as you sort of explain yourself in your article. So like, one thing is, like, if you're using a bunch of like really technical jargon in that space, explain those things. I think a more technical reader, you can even like call yourself out in the article and say, hey, this next paragraph is maybe not for you if you already understand this concept, to give like a short introduction to the concept at the top of the article. Yeah, I think it depends on your readers and like what your goals are. So if you want a more technical audience, write for the more technical one. If you want a broader audience, write for the broader one. Yeah, but I honestly would consider like writing 2 articles. I think that would be like a really smart way to write a couple articles and maybe get more of a you could have maybe an intro article and then like a deeper article, and people who are less familiar can read the intro, and then you could have a link at the bottom. Hey, here's like the follow-up if you're really interested in the subject.
Interesting. Cool. So we've got some other questions. Someone asks, what is the average amount of time you spend on a blog post, including writing back to comments and stuff, before you kind of move on to the next thing?
So I'm kind of a terrible content producer in some ways because I minimize the amount of time I spend like producing content. So I would say that like it depends on the length for sure and how much I care about something. There's some articles I've written that are like 2,000 words and I'm really angry about the thing and I want to like, so I'd spend longer on that. But for an average article, I would say I spend about an hour in total, maybe two. But I don't tend to edit as much as some people do because I focus on conciseness. I cut out half of what I write and I feel like what's left is usually pretty good. And then in terms of like engaging with the people that interact with it, that's organic. So maybe nobody engages with it and I don't really spend any time on that. Or maybe I get a bunch of comments and people are angry. And so I, engage a little bit more because angry people tend to engage more on the internet. But I think that in general, spending an hour or two writing is enough to get an article done. If you can't sit for that long, I mean, you can write, I've written articles in 15 minutes before just because they were quick one-offs. Like, here's 4 or 5 Git scripts that I use. It really just depends on how much you want to communicate in a post.
Cool. We've had a few questions in the Zoom chat I'm going to read out. So the first one is, approximately how many submissions do you get a month? How many are accepted on average?
You think you could clarify that a little bit? Is that like relating to writing on dev, or is that, what does that mean?
While we wait for a follow-up to that, the next question is, in terms of being consistent, would you advise writing or drafting a bunch of articles at once and then releasing them once a week, or actually writing one a week?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's different between different kinds of people. So I'm somebody that I sort of go through phases of like hyper focus and then being completely worthless in terms of productivity for like a few days. So for me, it's easier to write 3 or 4 articles like in a 1 week and then spread them out over a month. I do that with my podcast. Like I would record 5 or 6 episodes in a week and then release them over the next month or 2. So for me, that works really well. I think for some people who are better kind of suited for routine, it would be easier to just make that a part of your weekly or daily routine that you sit down and write for 10 or 30 minutes, whenever. I do think that it's very easy to burn out if you do what I do and like write out 5 or 6 articles in a week, because that's a lot of writing. And if writing is not your job, you're probably not used to like sitting down at a computer and typing that many words and trying to like edit yourself that much, because it is a pretty exhausting thing to like make sure like to really write like high quality stuff can be pretty exhausting. So that depends on you. I think both are great systems. It just depends on which one you feel more comfortable being consistent with. But I do think that writing a bunch at once, like batch content creation, is kind of a life hack for people like me who suck at being consistent over long periods of time.
Well, I'm not on mute. So we've got to follow up on the approximately how many submissions do you get a month? How many are accepted on average? They said writing on dev, I guess. Does that help?
Yeah, so I think, if I understand right, I think that like a lot of platforms that you write on as a technical content creator, you're going to submit like an article and they'll decide whether or not to publish it. Dev's more of a social media platform than that. Like anybody can write whatever they want. No one's going to like submit and then approve or reject your article idea. Just write an article and post it, kind of like you would write a post on Facebook or Reddit or Twitter. If you write things that violate our like code of conduct, you'll probably get removed, or at minimum, like your visibility will decrease on the platform. People probably won't find it from Google. But yeah, if you feel like writing something, don't worry too much about the quality of whether or not you're going to be rejected or accepted. That's not how we pretty much run dev. Like anyone's free to write whatever they want.
I'm on mute again. If anyone's got any more questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat, but I'm going to go back to some of the ones submitted beforehand. So I think you probably covered a lot of these in your talk, but if we're at the beginning of our software engineering career, what can we talk about in our blog, and what direction should we go in as we gain experience? Again, I feel like you kind of brushed upon that during your talk, but anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that like I thought about a lot. I didn't blog until a handful of years into my career at all, or write anything because of that. And I've met people who have done the opposite and had really good results. Um, One of the like best success stories of someone like writing articles and just having a lot of personal benefit from that, and really reaching a lot of people is someone who wrote on Dev. But she decided that she was just going to learn something new every week and write an article on it and just consistently do that. And she did it for like a year or longer. And again, has a huge following now. Like again, one of the biggest tech people on Twitter. And I think that that was a person who was coming out of a boot camp. They were very new to tech. And so I don't think that being new restricts you. So you can write about what you're learning about is a good one. Or you can write about things like that irritate you about your interactions with software engineers who maybe are more experienced. I have written stuff about, in pair programming situations, like it frustrates me when a senior person acts a certain way. And I think that you can get more out of pair programming if a senior person doesn't do that. So if you have those kind of frustrations, you could write about that. Or maybe your job hunt is another good thing to read about if you're trying to break into the tech industry. There's lots of conversations going on around how developers are hired right now.
Cool. So we have another question in the Zoom chat. So where do you post the link for your articles? Do you put them on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., etc.?
So when I was trying to get more people to read, I care less about how many people read my articles now than I used to, but when I was trying to do that a little bit more intentionally, I definitely posted on Twitter, I posted on LinkedIn. Those are probably the two best ways to like get some attention. But if you write on, like in my experience, again, I wrote on Dev, and for me that was a really smart choice because it put me in front of thousands and thousands of developers who were interested in the concept. And in many cases, if you write, high quality content on Dev, we're gonna post you on our social media accounts, which have pretty large followings, and try to syndicate your article for you. So that's what happened in a lot of my cases, that I would write an article that enough people were interested in and came across as high enough level of effort that I wasn't just posting spam, that like Dev worked on syndicating that for me. But again, I think Twitter and LinkedIn are both great options if you're trying to reach a larger audience.
Cool. I'm going to read out a few more of the questions we got submitted in, and then I think we'll wrap things up there, unless people need to disappear now. So someone asks, how do you make people read your blogs?
Yeah, I think that's a scary thing to focus on. People do that. They really want to have like high reader counts, a lot of like likes and shares and reactions. I've never really focused on that. I would not say that it doesn't affect me. Like, that's not true. I definitely like it when people read my articles and like my articles and stuff. But I don't shoot for that. I think that like trying to do that is a really good way to write stuff that doesn't really resonate with anyone. There's a really good article out there you can find from some time, and I don't know when it was written. It seems like it was early 2000s, but I have no idea. There's a article somewhere called 1,000 True Fans, or if you just Google that 1,000 True Fans, you'll find something pertaining to it probably. And the idea is basically that, I'm paraphrasing a lot here, but the idea is basically that you should write for a smaller, like more focused group of people, because you should create whatever it is you're making for a smaller, more focused group of people, because you really want to engage with people that care a lot about what you're doing. So rather than saying, oh yeah, someone linked it in there, in the chat. So rather than writing for 1 million people, try to write for 1,000 people. And maybe if 1,000 sounds like a big number, instead of writing for 1,000 people, write for 10 people. And if those 10 people really love what you write, they're going to share it with their friends, and you're going to reach a larger number of people by focusing on a smaller group of people.
Cool. So kind of following on from that, How do you identify if a certain topic is worth blogging about?
If I've thought about something like more than 2 or 3 times, and definitely if the real key for me when I'm like I need to write something about this is if someone has asked me the same question more than once. That's absolutely like the best way to determine if this is the thing I should write about, because every time someone asks me that question after that, I can just send them the link instead of like writing my answer again or explaining myself again.
So I'm going to kind of combine all these next few questions together. It's all relating to like trolls and stuff like that. Obviously, you have a code of conduct, which so does MLH, which helps to kind of like, you know, keep the community kind of a friendly and welcoming place. But what do you do about trolls? Can you selectively delete the troll comments? And should you enable comments to kind of, you know, in case you're concerned about people coming and, you know, bashing your content maybe or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's something that it's a big reason why I started writing on Dev rather than another platform or having my own blog. Like on my own blog, I never had comments because I just didn't want to argue with people like that. And I felt like that was a magnet for people that like were just going to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. On a platform like Dev, that doesn't happen that often. Is what's the coolest thing about that is like we just don't have a lot of trolls. And when we do have trolls, they're handled very well. I think right now we've gone back and forth on like the right way to handle this as a platform, and we're really trying to find the best answer for everyone. But I think right now you're able to hide troll comments on articles on Dev. Generally speaking, though, I just do my best not to interact with people that I think aren't acting in good faith. And that being said, something that changed my interactions online a few years ago is I started very consciously assuming that everyone on the internet has good intentions and that maybe you're just misunderstanding what they're saying. And that's not always true, but starting from that assumption really helps like take the bite out of a lot of things that sound like they might be trolling or they might be trying to goad you. If you think, oh, maybe this person just like is really bad at communicating sarcasm or is really bad at communicating like the question they're trying to ask, and they had the best intentions when they wrote this. That can really help with dealing with that sort of person online.
Perfect. The other questions submitted, I know you've already kind of covered those. I think we had one more question in the Zoom chat, and the Zoom chat does love to disappear from me when I'm trying to use it. Someone said they joined late, so they don't know if it's a repeat, but is tech blogging a great tool for networking?
Yeah, in my experience, that's like a resounding yes. I have an article on this, but if you guys really care about my answer to that question, there's an article on Dev somewhere on my account called like How I Got Hired at Dev or something like that. I would say that creating content has been like the thing that built my career in terms of like the people I know and the network I have. Again, I think I mentioned earlier in the talk, like I'm acquaintances and even in some cases friends with people that I, 3 or 4 years ago just idolized as like tech celebrities. But now I'm just like, oh yeah, that's a person I can text or talk to whenever I want, because I was able to, in some ways, become peers with those people just by sharing my ideas online and, trying to give back to that community.
Cool. So I think we're going to wrap things up there. If anyone has any more questions, Jacob is in the Discord server, and I'm sure, and on dev.to and Twitter, all the platforms. And like he already said, he's more than happy to review any of your submissions and stuff, or like give you some feedback. So I'd definitely take him up on that opportunity while you can. Thank you, Jacob, for coming along. Really do appreciate it. I'm sure the fellows have had a great time. And any closing thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm super happy to be here. Like Will said, I'm on the Discord server. You can ping me on there. You're not bothering me. I like meeting new people. And I really hope I see some familiar names crop up on Dev. And again, more than happy to review your drafts and help you get some articles out there if you're interested in pursuing that.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jacob. All right, bye for now.